HOA Karen repeatedly slapped my disabled daughter, unaware I work at the Department of Justice. Part 1. They say true rage doesn't scream. It doesn't throw punches. It walks. It watches. It waits. That's what I did when I saw Karen slap my daughter across the face for the second time. My name is Andrew S. Holt, Senior Prosecutor, Civil Rights Division, U.S. Department of Justice. I've worked cases that reach the Supreme Court. I've sat across the table from state governors and white supremacists alike. I've litigated on behalf of prisoners abused in private jails and kids expelled because of the color of their skin. But nothing prepared me for the sound of my daughter's cheek being struck. And not once, 3 times, by a woman named Karen Braxton, wearing a navy polo shirt embroidered with HOA safety enforcement stitched in gold. My daughter, Cassidy, is 11 years old. She approached me as we were unloading our moving truck, clipboard in hand, lips pursed so tightly they nearly disappeared. "Sir," she said, "you're exceeding the driveway margin. There's a rule here about symmetry." I blinked. "Are you with the HOA board?" Her chin lifted. "The board dissolved in 2020, but I've maintained neighborhood standards under community trust." "Ah, one of those. I appreciate your concern," I said in the practiced voice I use on hostile witnesses, "but I'll be done unloading in 30 minutes. Her nostrils flared. "See that it's not longer." She turned, marched away. Cassidy whispered, "That's the lawn lady." "Right," I smiled. "No, sweetheart. That's the clipboard queen." We didn't laugh again for a while. The weeks that followed were a slow drip of indignities. Handwritten notices taped to our door. Complaints about unregistered garden infrastructure. Cassidy's rose trellis. A demand that we relocate the mobility ramp to a less visible side. Each letter was unsigned but stamped with the gold seal, Wexley Heights HOA Enforcement Division. There was no such department. It was a lie Karen wore like perfume. Then came Saturday. Cassidy had been invited to her first block gathering. It was a patio paint and play organized by the neighborhood council, not Karen. Kids drew chalk murals. Parents shared lemonade. And Cassidy had finally been encouraged to participate, wheelchair and all. She'd worked all morning on her design, a red and gold phoenix rising from the cracks in the concrete. By 3 p.m., she was almost done. That's when Karen appeared. She walked straight to Cassidy without looking at a single other child. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Cassidy looked up, startled. It's my phoenix." Karen's eyes narrowed. "This is common space. You can't vandalize sidewalks." "She has permission," I said, stepping forward. "The HOA board approved the event. So did the council." Karen snorted. "The council has no authority, and that chair shouldn't even be on this path. It's a tripping hazard. It's a wheelchair, not a weapon." Karen leaned in. Maybe she shouldn't be here if she can't control herself. Before I could respond, she did the unthinkable. She reached down and slapped Cassidy's cheek. Hard. Cassidy reeled, her head snapping sideways. Gasps erupted. Someone dropped a cooler, a mother screamed, and then Karen did it again. Cassidy flinched. Her lower lip trembled. "Karen, stop," I roared, stepping between them. Karen shoved past me and slapped Cassidy a third time. The world stopped. I stepped forward and grabbed her wrist. "You just assaulted a child with a disability in front of 20 witnesses." She looked shocked but not ashamed. She defaced community property. I let go of her wrist and pulled back my jacket. My DOJ badge flashed in the sunlight. The crowd inhaled. Karen stumbled backward. What I stared at her. "You're under citizen's arrest pending local law enforcement. And when they arrive, you will be charged with assault, civil rights violations under the ADA, and potentially federal hate crime enhancements." Her mouth opened, closed. For the first time, Karen had no words. Police arrived within 6 minutes. I briefed the officers calmly, my voice a practiced scalpel. Parents gave statements. A teenager handed over footage he'd taken on his phone. Karen tried to claim Cassidy had mouthed off. Cassidy hadn't said a word. She was still shaking when I picked her up and held her. "Dad," she whispered. Why did she hit me? I didn't have an answer. But I made a vow. That woman would never touch another child again. Back home, Cassidy fell asleep with a cold compress on her cheek. I kissed her forehead, turned off the lights, and sat in the kitchen. Not as a father, but as a federal prosecutor. I didn't open wine. I opened my laptop, and I started a case file. Part 2. By Sunday morning, the entire street had changed. Where there were once trimmed hedges and fake smiles, now there were whispers, uneasy glances, a silence that buzzed like a wire about to snap, because the video had gone viral overnight. The boy who filmed it, Noah Thompson, posted it to a local parents forum with the caption HOA enforcer slaps disabled girl for drawing chalk art. Within hours, it hit Facebook, then Twitter, then local news. By the time I arrived at the precinct for Karen's formal charging hearing, it had racked up over 1.3 million views. I entered through the back, my DOJ badge clipped to my belt. The chief investigator, Sergeant Eliza Braun, met me outside the interview room. She lawyered up, Braun said, chewing the inside of her cheek. Her attorneys claiming misunderstanding under HOA community standards. There is no HOA, I said flatly. She insists she's been operating under a public trust mandate. My jaw tightened. Then she's going to learn the difference between a clipboard and criminal intent. I stepped into the observation booth and watched her sit, arms crossed, refusing water, lips tight. Karen looked less like an enforcer and more like a substitute teacher who'd been caught cheating on an exam. She had no remorse, just disbelief that anyone would dare hold her accountable. Back home, Cassidy was quieter than usual. Her bruised cheek had turned a sickly purple, and she refused to go near the front window. The very idea of seeing Karen again made her whimper. She wouldn't even touch her chalk set. The phoenix she'd drawn was still smeared across the sidewalk, now blurred by passing feet and sprinkler runoff. I called the school, arranged for Cassidy to take 2 weeks off, and began the process of filing for a protective order. But I knew it wouldn't stop there, because Karen wasn't acting alone. She was part of a pattern, and I've spent 20 years of my life breaking those patterns. I pulled county records on Wexley Heights. There had been no official HOA since 2020, when the developer folded and failed to renew the association's charter. Legally, all fines, citations, and enforcement actions after that date were null and void. Yet dozens of families still believed the HOA was active. Why? Because of the seal. Karen had duplicated the original gold emblem from the charter documents, printed it on laminated notices, and created fake rule books she distributed to new homeowners. She even set up a Gmail address, wexleyho_enforce_egmail.com. Through this, she'd been issuing fake fines, threats of liens, and even summons to compliance meetings which she held in her garage. I reached out to a few neighbors quietly. What they told me chilled me. One woman was fined $500 for excessive outdoor toys. A black father was told to remove his Pan-African flag because it disrupted visual harmony. A veteran was cited for flying the American flag without rotational clearance. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was systemic targeting disguised as community order. I met with DOJ's Civil Rights Division by Tuesday. They reviewed the footage, my field notes, and the forged documentation I gathered. Andrew, my supervisor, said, "This is more than assault. This qualifies under Title II of the ADA, and possibly as a hate crime." I nodded. "But it's not just about pressing charges." I said, "I want the system that let her believe this was okay to face justice, too." He leaned back. "Then it's time to go bigger." By Thursday, Karen had been released on bail, but the consequences had just begun. Parents picketed outside her house. Someone left a chalk drawing on her driveway, a phoenix rising, with the words, "She still flies." Karen's husband filed for separation that same day. Her employer, a local insurance firm, put her on indefinite leave. But even then, she couldn't help herself. She called a neighborhood meeting on Zoom, demanding order be restored before the community descended into lawless chaos. She blamed Cassidy, called the video selective editing, tried to claim she was the one being harassed. That clip leaked, too, and America wasn't buying it. I was contacted by several journalists, but declined interviews. This wasn't about publicity. This was about precedent. Instead, I focused on building a federal case not just against Karen, but against the pattern of fake HOA abuse being exploited across the country. With DOJ authorization, I created a task file named Operation Phantom Code. We discovered similar cases in Colorado, Texas, Arizona, and Florida. Every one of them involved an inactive or unregulated HOA, a self-appointed compliance officer, targeting of disabled, immigrant, or low-income residents. Forged documentation designed to look official. And every one of them had a Karen. Different names, same methods, same cruelty. By the end of the second week, Cassidy finally stepped outside. She didn't speak. She just wheeled herself to the smudged phoenix, picked up a piece of blue chalk, and drew a single word underneath the wings. Still. Then she looked at me. Dad, she said, am I going to be safe here? I knelt down beside her. No, I said, you're going to be stronger than safe. That night, I got an email from the DOJ's senior litigation team. We're ready to move. Civil rights violation filing approved. You've got green light on federal escalation. I looked at Cassidy sleeping on the couch, a stuffed phoenix plushie in her arms, and I began drafting a lawsuit that would change everything. Part 3. Justice, I've learned, is rarely about the person in front of you. It's about the pattern behind them, the unseen wires, the silent players, the machine that feeds on fear while cloaking itself in order. Karen wasn't just a rogue neighbor. She was a cog in something bigger. And I was going to rip out every bolt of it. The federal complaint against Karen had been filed. ADA violations, civil rights violations, assault, fraud. But as I worked with DOJ analysts, I realized something strange. Karen wasn't charging anyone directly. All the fines she issued, they weren't paid to her. They were made out to an LLC, Community Preservation Services, a company with a P.O. box 3 towns over and a business license approved 1 year after the Wexley Heights HOA dissolved. The agent of record, a man named Elias Trent, former real estate consultant, no criminal record, but a known associate of several dissolved HOAs and property turnover firms in the Mid-Atlantic. So I dug deeper. Community Preservation Services had been contracted not just by Wexley Heights, but by 16 other inactive HOA communities. Same model, no elected board, no oversight, just a volunteer compliance corps operated by local ambassadors like Karen. I cross-referenced their names. Karen Braxton appeared on an internal email list between these enforcers titled Guardians of Order. The messages weren't just procedural, they were chilling. Ramp installation on Elm Street complete. Prep citation for visual imbalance. Tenant on Maple refuses to remove cultural flag. Shall I begin the lien process? Single mother, W's disability child, possible leverage for voluntary relocation? These people weren't protecting neighborhoods. They were cleansing them. I took the evidence to Agent Lou Kessler at DHS Threat Assessment. He'd worked with me on extremist cases, but even he looked disturbed as he flipped through the digital correspondence. This is organized intimidation disguised as governance. He said, it's not just civil, it's coordinated abuse. With DOJ's blessing, we partnered with DHS to form a joint task force, Phantom Code. Within a week, we'd identified 32 communities using fake or inactive HOA branding, 47 compliance agents linked to Trent's network, over 200 falsified citations involving disabled residents or cultural identifiers. Karen wasn't the exception. She was standard operating procedure. But it went further. In a sting operation, we had an undercover agent contact Community Preservation Services, posing as a new homeowner wanting to restore order in their neighborhood. The response, a packaged kit complete with fake citation forms, pre-written bylaws, lawn signage templates, and even a training video. We watched it in the field office. It opened with soft piano music. A smiling woman stood before a manicured lawn. Welcome to your new role as a neighborhood standard steward. Today's communities face threats of visual inconsistency, demographic destabilization, and behavioral variance. I paused the tape. Demographic destabilization. Kessler shook his head. It's a dog whistle. They're teaching people to target by class, disability, and race. In a following scene, the woman listed warning signs of property value decline, unpermitted wheelchair ramps, non-English signage, flags that may incite division. I felt my stomach twist. Cassidy's chalk phoenix had been their red flag. We issued warrants for Elias Trent. He'd vanished. But we found his right-hand woman, Marlene Dorr, Director of Regional Preservation Initiatives. She was apprehended in Virginia Beach at a compliance workshop disguised as a homeowner's brunch. Her laptop gave us everything: financial spreadsheets with eviction incentives, bonuses for rapid voluntary relocation, a blacklist labeled Watch Families, Potential Resistors. The whole family was on it. Next to our name, daughter disabled, father lawyer, high risk, proceed with caution. They knew exactly who I was. They just didn't care. We unmasked the structure: Level 1 local enforcers like Karen, Level 2 regional operatives like Marlene, Level 3 coordination hub under CPS LLC, Level 4, a holding company called Lamaris Strategic Revitalization, hidden behind 4 shell firms. And behind that apolitical action committee, the American Zoning Foundation, backed by donors who'd been funneling money to neighborhood improvement groups pushing regressive policy and profiting from gentrification-based foreclosures. They'd built an empire on intimidation, and we were going to burn it to the ground. We launched simultaneous federal raids in 6 states, 37 arrests, seizure of over $19 million in assets. The DOJ filed a class action civil rights lawsuit on behalf of 118 affected families, including us. News outlets exploded: CNN, MSNBC. Even 60 Minutes ran a special titled order: Obedience and the Cost of Control Inside America's Fake HOA Crisis. At the center of it, Cassidy. Her face on the screen, her chalk phoenix, her bruised cheek, and her voice. They tried to erase me, but I left a mark they couldn't wash away. Wexley Heights held an emergency community forum 2 weeks later. No Karen, no more gold seal notices. Just neighbors, real ones, coming together, humbled and ashamed. A woman who once defended Karen stood up and said, "I was silent when Cassidy was hurt. I can't undo it, but I can promise it won't happen again." She handed Cassidy a gift, a new chalk set, every stick shaped like a feather. Cassidy just nodded. "Thanks," she said, "but I'll draw my next phoenix on the library steps." We installed a permanent ADA-compliant mural space near the school. Cassidy designed the first piece herself. It read, "Neighborhoods don't need order, they need love." Under it, a phoenix, wings open wide this time, with room for everyone underneath. Part 4: empires never crumble with a single strike. They unravel thread by thread until what once stood tall collapses into dust beneath its own weight. Karen was the match. Cassidy was the spark. But it was the network, the dark empire behind them, that now stood in our crosshairs. After the raids and arrests, DOJ's Operation Phantom Code took on a life of its own. The subpoenas went deeper, the targets grew bolder, and the fallout reached the very heart of influence in this country. First, we got Lamaris Strategic Revitalization, the shadowy holding company funding fake HOA enforcement. The paper trail, thanks to Marlene Dorr's decrypted laptop, led to a Delaware-based trust. From there on, it unraveled into shell companies registered in the Caymans, all pointing to one central node: Regis Cavendish, billionaire developer, media mogul, and longtime political donor. Cavendish had built a real estate empire on community transformation projects, high-end flips, cleanliness campaigns, and zoning reforms designed to edge out vulnerable residents under the guise of improvement. His fingerprints were on over 73 communities revitalized through compliance conversion tactics, fake HOAs, faux citations, pressure campaigns. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a blueprint. When we called Cavendish in for questioning, he didn't come alone. He arrived with a 6-man legal team and a smirk that said he'd beaten every system before. "You're mistaken," he told us, sipping sparkling water. "We fund community empowerment, not enforcement." I slid the photos across the table. Photos of Karen, of Trent, of shell company signatures that matched his. I showed him Cassidy's name on the watch list. His smirk faltered. "This is going to be public," I said. He leaned in. You think the American public cares. They care about clean streets, property values, law and order. He didn't say it, but he didn't have to. They won't care about kids like yours. That was the moment I knew he wasn't just a financier, he was a believer. And that made him dangerous. DOJ filed a RICO indictment within 72 hours, wire fraud, civil rights violations, conspiracy to defraud the United States, obstruction of justice, and targeted persecution of protected groups under the guise of civic order. Cavendish's empire cracked overnight. Stockholders pulled out. Contracts froze. His flagship redevelopment project in Atlanta, already mired in protests, was canceled. But the real blow came when Congress called a special oversight hearing on domestic abuse through private enforcement systems. I was subpoenaed to testify. So was Cassidy. They flew us to D.C. in March. The Capitol dome shimmered under a winter sun as we walked into the chamber together, me in my DOJ blazer, her in a soft blue sweater and her new chair, trimmed with feathers. The room was full. Lawmakers, reporters, advocates, victims, and Karen. Yes, Karen testifying under protective immunity in exchange for full cooperation. Her voice was smaller now, her face paler. When asked why she slapped my daughter, she didn't dodge. She represented everything I was taught to fear: disorder, defiance, vulnerability. She paused, then added, almost tearfully, "But I understand now." She was stronger than I ever was. Then it was Cassidy's turn. She was nervous, but when she rolled up to the mic, the entire room fell silent. "I'm not broken," she said. "They thought my chair meant I was less, but I can do things they can't. I forgive Karen, but I won't let anyone do that again." A senator dabbed her eyes. A father in the audience clapped, then the whole room followed. Even on C-SPAN, the moment broke through. The clip of Cassidy went viral. Again. The girl in the chair brought down an empire. The dominoes kept falling. 5 U.S. representatives returned donations linked to Cavendish. 4 cities suspended HOA enforcement pending audits. The American Bar Association issued new ethical guidelines for HOA law practices. The White House launched the Fair Communities Initiative, focused on rebuilding trust where private enforcement had turned abusive. And me, I was offered a promotion, division head, civil rights enforcement, but I turned it down because I wasn't done being a father first. Back home, Wexley Heights was no longer the same place. Gone were the gold-stamped notices, the whispered judgment. In their place, a real neighborhood board elected democratically, inclusive, transparent, and a new rule. No one speaks for the community unless the community gives them voice. They built a memorial at the community park. Not a statue, nothing grand, just a bench. With Cassidy's words etched into the wood, "You don't have to walk to stand up for others." Kids gather there now, draw chalk, tell stories. They call it the Phoenix Bench. Karen entered a restorative justice program as part of her plea. One afternoon, months later, she showed up at the park. Cassidy was there. Karen walked up, quiet, empty-handed. "I'm sorry," she said, "not just for hitting you, but for thinking you didn't belong here." Cassidy stared at her for a long moment. Then she said, "I hope you learn to belong somewhere, too," Karen cried. And then she left. She didn't come back. But the apology stayed. Justice doesn't end in a courtroom. It lives in neighborhoods, in murals, in benches, in the space between people who decide to show up better than they were yesterday. That night, as we watched the sun set over our backyard, Cassidy curled up next to me and said, "Dad, yeah, baby, do you think we changed anything?" I looked at her. "You changed everything." Part 5. There's a moment after the courtroom falls silent, after the cameras turn away, after justice has technically been served, when you're left alone with the question, "Now what?" That's where real change begins. Cassidy didn't want a parade. She didn't want speeches. She didn't even want to talk about Karen anymore. "I don't want to be famous for what she did to me," she told me one night, sitting on the edge of her bed. "I want to be remembered for what I did after." That one sentence changed the course of my life. 3 months after the congressional hearing, I resigned from my role at the DOJ, not out of anger, not even out of exhaustion, out of clarity, because if I truly believed in justice, then it couldn't end with prosecutions. It had to start earlier in the neighborhoods, in the rules, in the way we treat people who move differently or look different or speak with quiet voices. So I founded a nonprofit in Cassidy's name. We called it Rising Phoenix, a movement for accessible justice. Our mission was deceptively simple. Make every neighborhood in America a place where every child, especially those with disabilities, can thrive. Without fear, we began with legal literacy, workshops for families targeted by fake HOA threats, mobile legal clinics that reviewed citations, fine notices, and compliance demands and tore them apart line by line. We sent attorneys into public schools to help educators recognize when students with disabilities were being subtly excluded from activities under the guise of safety. Cassidy called it chalk power for paper bullies. But the real breakthrough came when Rising Phoenix partnered with city planners. We launched Project Welcome Path, a pilot program for universal access in suburban design. Every sidewalk graded for all chairs, every playground inclusive, every community event required to be ADA compliant before a permit was granted. By year one, we had 5 cities signed on. By year 2, we had 22. By year 3, Congress was calling us for advice. Cassidy became a speaker not because she wanted to, but because others needed her to. At 13, she addressed the United Nations again, this time at the Global Forum on Disability and Human Settlement. She stood figuratively and literally with kids from Sri Lanka, Norway, Brazil. I didn't get here by being strong. She said, I got here because people around me stopped pretending I was fragile. The backlash, of course, came. Anonymous trolls called it woke compliance. Some pundits on conservative talk shows mocked her, said she was being used by her father. It hurt. But Cassidy, she didn't flinch. She posted a single photo to her new social account, a picture of her original broken chalk set next to the Phoenix bench, captioned, "You can mock me. I'll still draw." In Wexley Heights, everything changed. The HOA was never resurrected. Instead, neighbors formed a neighborhood equity board, a volunteer group that focused on care, not compliance. One man, Mr. Watkins, a retired Marine, used his garage to build custom ramps for elderly neighbors who'd once been fined for exterior modifications. Someone repainted the curbs in Cassidy's favorite colors, teal and gold. The girl who once felt pushed out now had a neighborhood that bent inward to hold her. Karen never returned to Wexley. Last I heard, she was living in a small town in Oregon, working as a caregiver for elderly patients. A journalist asked Cassidy once if she forgave her. Cassidy shrugged. I didn't forgive her for her sake. I forgave her so I didn't have to carry her anymore. One of the most powerful moments of my life came not in a courtroom, but in a classroom. We were visiting a middle school in Milwaukee, giving a Rising Phoenix talk. At the end, a boy raised his hand. He wore leg braces and had a stutter. He asked Cassidy, "How do you not feel angry when people treat you like you're not all the way?" Here, Cassidy looked at him, thoughtful, then said, "Because I know I'm going somewhere they'll never reach." By the time Cassidy turned 15, the Rising Phoenix Act had been signed into federal law. It mandated all neighborhoods built with federal funding must include accessibility design from day one. Show boards must undergo annual civil rights training. Any enforcement policy disproportionately affecting disabled or minority residents is subject to federal review. At the signing ceremony, Cassidy was invited to stand beside the president. Instead of a speech, she simply rolled forward, handed him a feather-shaped pen, and whispered, "Make it fly." There's a photo I keep on my desk. It's not of a courtroom or a stage or even Cassidy's chalk murals. It's her at age 16 on top of a rocky bluff overlooking the ocean. Arms out, wheelchair parked beside her. She climbed it, on her own. I asked her later why. She said, "Because I was told I couldn't." That's what Karen never understood. That when you strike a child, not just with your hand, but with your assumptions, your judgment, your fear, you don't push them down. You launch them. Because kids like Cassidy, they don't just rise, they rise into something better. I used to prosecute hate with case law. Now I fight it with chalk, with benches, with ramps and microphones and quietly powerful daughters, and I've never felt more like a justice worker in my life. My name is Andrew Holt. I'm not just a federal prosecutor. I'm not just the founder of Rising Phoenix. I'm Cassidy's dad. And I've seen what happens when we choose courage over control. We don't just tear down empires. We build something better in their place. The end.